Energy Matters podcast. Howdy everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Texas A&M University Society of Petroleum Engineers Energy Matters podcast. I'm Kassem, your host for today's podcast, which is featuring our special guest, Mr. Ron Gusek, the president of Liberty Energy. Ron is joining us today to share more insight from his career about the topic, which is why hydraulic fracturing is still important and why the world needs more hydraulic fracturing. So wish you all a happy listening. Just to inform you, this podcast is going to be recorded and it will be published to all of our social media platforms. In the end, we have around 15 minutes for your questions. So you are free to ask all of your questions at the end. You can also type them to the chat box. And for TAMU students, we will do a merchandise draw at the end as a gift for Thanksgiving. So stay to the end and we will do this after our podcast. All right. And now I think we can start our event. Let me introduce our guest. Ron Gusek has been the president of Liberty Energy since November 2016. Before assuming this role, Ron was the VP of Technology and Development in 2014. Over the past 25 years, Ron has gathered extensive oil and gas experience in North America and extended his knowledge of operation through travels to Asia, Russia, and Middle East. Ron holds a BS in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Alberta. Outside of work, Ron is a husband to Judy, father to daughters Abby and Robin, runner, cyclist, hiker, skier, and occasional adventure racer. Wow. Welcome, Mr. Gusek, and we are very glad to have you with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me to be part of your podcast.
Thank you so much. And yeah, let's get started.
All right.
Before digging into your professional career, I would like to ask you a question that I usually ask all of our guests. So for you, what do you think the term energy matters stands for? And what's your point of view regarding the idea of having, in our current era, having an affordable and a secure energy? What does this sound to you?
Oh gosh, I love the name of your podcast. That's such an important message, and unfortunately, I think one that doesn't get talked about enough today. We're maybe in a bit of a unique position this year in that the world is having a lot more pragmatic conversation around energy and its importance than we probably have had in a little while now. But so let me back up to your first question. What does energy matters mean? I'll take a stab at that from two different levels. And first of all, from a very broad level, and I think about it just in the context of how important energy is in our world. Energy matters because energy is the root of absolutely everything. The world we live in, every organism that lives in it, without energy, of course, none of this is possible. And I mean that down to the absolutely fundamental level. Organisms live on this world because we figured out how to make energy from the breaking of chemical bonds. And so here we are as a globe now with all of these wonderful species on it. And as we begin to move forward through time, that whole idea of energy matters becomes more and more important. And certainly for us as the human race, thinking about it now in a little more specific context, oh my gosh, it's impossible to understate, I think, how important energy is to us. And you don't have to go back that far, I think, to really understand the context of that. We talk about it in our ESG report. And I would say for those listening to the podcast who haven't looked at it, please go to our website and download the Bettering Human Lives report. That's the ESG report we put out every year. The first half of that document talks about how important energy is to us and the context of energy in the world. But just in terms of putting some thought around how important energy is, I think you only have to back up 150 or 200 years. You know, humanity's been on the globe for tens of thousands of years, really north of 1 million years. But since the agricultural revolution, let's call it 10,000 plus years. And we had a lifespan that was maybe 30 plus years. And then in the last 150 years, first of all, with the discovery of coal and ultimately layering on top of that oil and gas, We've seen a dramatic transformation in humanity. We now have a lifespan that is north of 70 years. It's not that every place yet. We have some work to do there, but it has more than doubled. We've lifted a significant portion of the population out of poverty. We have planes, trains, and automobiles. We have skyscrapers. We have the internet. I mean, all of this in the last 150 years, all because of access to low cost, reliable, affordable energy. There are probably some other factors that play into that, but none of that would be possible without access to energy. And so energy matters. Absolutely. The foundation to the world we know and the life we live today. And so, going on to your second question, then the importance of access to affordable, reliable energy. There are 1 billion people on the earth today who still don't have access to electricity. There are another 1 billion who have access to intermittent electricity. Think less electricity than your refrigerator uses on an annual basis. That's a travesty, and it shows in the numbers. If you look at the people who lack access to energy, how they spend their day, the life they live, it's dramatically different than the life than you and I know, and we can't be okay with that. We have to work hard to provide equal access to energy for everybody in the globe, and it has to be affordable, and it has to be reliable, and it has to be accessible. I think we found out probably this year, maybe more so than any year in the recent past, just how important affordable energy is. We've seen energy prices move dramatically. Europe is feeling that firsthand in a world that probably has not felt that for many, many years. And certainly we experience that here in North America too. We don't like to think about poverty as being a huge issue here, but there are a lot of people in North America today who are unfortunately probably making a hard decision between paying their energy bill and putting food on their table. And that's a function of where energy cost is today. So we have to do all we can to make energy accessible and affordable and reliable. And the oil and gas industry, the industry we work in, absolutely the number one industry in making that possible.
Excellent answer. Thank you. Yeah, currently we have different sources of energy. We have solar, wind, and many other forms of energy. So what does the oil and gas resources, or where does these petroleum industry stand in this equation? Why till now, with all the technological advancement, why we haven't gotten all our energy from renewable resources? What makes the oil and gas still continuing till now? Why we are still depending on oil and gas till now? So I know we are advocates for oil and gas industry, but what do you think about this?
I think there are very practical reasons for that. I think if you look at how the energy mix around the globe has transformed with time, and I won't use the word transition because I don't think there really has been one. We've seen an evolution that has really added to the energy mix, but never really transformed the energy mix. So biofuels have been a part of our world for centuries now, really for millennia, since the discovery of fire, I guess, so that you'd have to go back a long ways for biofuels to become part of our energy mix. And then we ultimately layered on top of that wind historically, and then came the discovery of coal, and then we added oil, and then we added natural gas, and ultimately at the very top of that mix came nuclear. And then we've gone backwards a little bit in terms of adding wind and solar to that mix again. But I think if you took those two out of the picture and just looked at that first story that I told you, what you could ascertain from that is that we moved as a society continually towards ever denser fuels that generated the same amount of power with less input. And so you move from using wind power to using wood, to using coal, to using oil and natural gas, and ultimately to nuclear, which is the most dense fuel source we can find. And there are reasons for that. And so I think if you look at renewables, of course, they play a bit of a role in our world today, but only 2 or 3%, and I'm talking specifically about wind and solar in this case, of the global energy mix today. And the reason for that well, I think there's a long list of reasons. But first of all, they're just less dense. It takes an immense amount of effort to extract a meaningful amount of energy from wind and or solar. I think I'm pretty safe in saying there is not a single thing in nature that is powered by the wind. And I think there's probably a good reason for that. It's intermittent. It's unreliable. You can't count on it day in and day out. The same is not true for the sun. Of course, plants, but certainly far less complex organisms than us rely on the sun as an energy form for them. But as organisms get more and more complex, so too is the energy source that they need to rely on to support them. And I think we've seen that in humanity. We've continually progressed to these ever denser energy sources. And as for replacing the ones that we currently use today, I think the reason that hasn't happened is it's near impossible with the solutions that are being proposed. If you look at the energy density of a battery relative to a gallon of oil, it's dramatically different. It's not plausible to think about a scenario where we take and replace 15 or 20 gallons of gas in your fuel, 15 or 20 gallons of fuel in your car with a battery pack easily. And you just have to look at the weight difference between those two things to understand that. 1,000 pounds of batteries in a Tesla and 100 pounds of fuel in your car. Those numbers are very, very different. And so when we start to think about the transportation industry, of course that gets very, very complicated. And of course, that's a meaningful part of energy consumption. But if you look at the whole spectrum of primary energy consumption, probably the other place that is really, really difficult to contemplate is primary energy consumption in the form of heat for things like aluminum or other mineral smelting and whatnot, concrete, cement, things like that require a massive amount of energy. And our ability to do that with intermittent and less or more dilute energy sources, I think is extremely difficult. And so, despite well north of $1 trillion of investment, we haven't seen a transition there. And the reason for that is it's not easy to replace oil and gas because they have properties that are not replaceable with at least the mechanisms we're looking at today.
Yep. That's really interesting, and like the proof that we are currently like witnessing the proof, which is like the energy crisis that are happening in Europe. So the oil and gas industry will continue to play a major role in the energy mix for at least 20
decades and decades and decades. Certainly, I don't expect my lifespan to end with oil and gas not being a meaningful part of it. I'm 51 today. I hope to live another 40 years or more. And I expect oil and gas will be a big, big piece of our energy mix through all of that time. It was, fossil fuels were probably 87% of the energy mix. I hope I get these numbers right. When I was born in 1971, I think they're 82% today. So in 51 years, we've moved the needle about 5%.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right. Let's get personal now.
All right.
Switch the gears to a little bit more about your professional career. So I know that you were born in Canada, and you pursued a degree in mechanical engineering. So what made you being interested in the oil and gas industry? Was it like by chance, or you were interested in or encouraged to be in this industry, especially that Alberta is very famous for its oil and gas natural resources?
You are correct. Oil and gas is a big deal in Alberta. It was, I don't know if this is true anymore, but certainly when I was growing up, it was probably 35% of Alberta's GDP, give or take a little bit. So it was a big deal. I was a teenager in the 80s. And for those of you who study the history of oil and gas, you will know that through the 80s, there was some tough times for oil and gas. There was a 5-year stretch there that was incredibly challenging. And we felt that in Alberta. There were significant layoffs. The economic situation in the province was not great. And I, as a high schooler at that point in time, wasn't terribly excited about going into oil and gas. In fact, I would tell you quite candidly, I swore I wasn't going to work in oil and gas because it was too volatile. And so when I went to mechanical engineering, it wasn't with the intent of ending up in the oil and gas industry. In fact, that's not where I started my career. I started in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, thinking that everybody would need that day in and day out, and that would prove to be a long and stable career. And so I spent the first 4 years of my career working for a small manufacturing firm that manufactured commercial heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment for industrial and commercial applications. And enjoyed that a great deal. I love mechanical things. That's why I became a mechanical engineer. I loved engines and motors and things. And that was a piece of the world I could apply my learnings in. The truth of the matter is I ended up in oil and gas a little bit by accident. So I didn't have a good friend from engineering who wasn't working in oil and gas. Every one of the colleagues that I had gone to school with that was a close friend ended up in the oil and gas industry. And so as it was, I had a roommate who worked in oil and gas. He worked for NALSCO, then BJ Services in Canada. He was a coil tuber. And he came home one day and mentioned that they were looking for some additional engineering staff in their team. And he offered to set up an interview with me, with the engineering manager at the time. And so I went and met him on a Monday. I knew nothing about hydraulic fracturing at all, but he interviewed me to be a frac engineer. I was intrigued by the idea, but if I'm being perfectly honest, what sold me on the job change was almost purely financial. I was earning $32,000 a year as an engineer in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. They offered me $48,000 a year, a 50% pay raise to go to work in frac. And so I took the plunge. I left heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and I went to frac, and I have not looked back. It has been an incredible transition. I am so grateful that that opportunity came to me. And while I maybe hang my head a little bit for the reason I did it, it ultimately has been a wonderful career, and I couldn't be more grateful for a life in oil and gas.
Oh, that's interesting. Could you please tell us more about your position at BG Services, where you spent like around, I think, 5 years, and then you did that switch to another company, which is Pinnacle Technologies, where you also spent around 5 years. Could you please tell us more about your position and your roles during this period?
Yeah, sure can. So like I said, when I got to BJ, I didn't know anything about hydraulic fracturing and mechanical engineering. Of course, we had not studied oil and gas in any way, shape, or form. And while it was an important part of life in Alberta, it was not in my family at all. I didn't have anybody who worked in the oil and gas industry close to me. And so I didn't know, I didn't frankly know much of anything when I started there. And so I spent some time in the field, beginning to understand what hydraulic fracturing was and how we pumped a job. And so I worked alongside a crew out of Red Deer and went out to see all of the variety of jobs that we pumped. And back then, this is late 97, early 1998. Of course, the variety of jobs we pumped looks meaningfully different than it does in our world today. We pump pretty much the same thing day in and day out here today. But when I started in hydraulic fracturing, we pumped cross-linked water jobs. We pumped gelled oil jobs. We pumped gelled methanol. We pumped liquid CO2. We pumped 70 quality nitrogen foam jobs. We pumped something called a poly CO2, which is a mix of CO2, oil, and water. We pumped all kinds of stuff. And so you got up every day and went out to the field, and you never knew what you were going to see. Every day was a little bit different. And of course, we weren't working 24 hours a day at that point in time. When I was on a frac crew, we'd crawl out of bed pretty early in the morning. We were on location as the sun came up. We'd get rigged in. We'd frac a stage or two on a vertical well. We were probably rigged out by maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon and back in town in time to go to the bar for a beer. And that was the way the frac world was. So I started out there. I got my feet wet in the field, and then ultimately they got me back into the office. I'd been hired to write frac programs and whatnot. And so I moved into the office. I probably spent 18 months in the Calgary office with BJ, just writing frac programs, working side by side with the sales team to develop for our customers the right frac program for their well, and then to present that to them and whatever other technical work needed to go alongside of that. I moved from that to being an in-house engineer. What started as POCO, Petroleum, ultimately came Burlington Resources, then Conoco. They were BJ's largest customer in Canada at the time. They kept typically 3 of our frac crews busy day in and day out. And so I moved in-house. I spent 18 months sitting in-house at their office. I wrote all of their frac programs. We satellited every frac job into the office. So I watched every frac job we ever pumped personally and made all the calls from the desk as to, when we were changing concentration, any changes in the chemistry that might be required. So I did that alongside the Burlington team. And then I ultimately moved back to head office and became the chief engineer of the frac department. So I oversaw all of the frac engineering team. That was the tail end of my time at BJ Services. And then I guess it was probably May of 2000, maybe April of 2003. I got a call from Kevin Fisher at Pinnacle Technologies. He was the vice president of business development there at the time. And he asked if I'd be interested in interviewing for the role of Canadian Region Manager for Pinnacle Technologies. Now, I knew a little bit about Pinnacle at the time. We had done some fracture mapping in Canada, and they had been up to give some presentations, some technical presentations that I'd attended. So I was familiar with the company and this idea of being able to map a hydraulic fracture at that time using tilt meters. Microseismic was not yet fully commercial technology, but starting to come around. And so I went for the interview with them. And that was on a Monday. And by Friday afternoon, I had a job offer to run Pinnacle Canada. That was a pretty big change for me. I had never been a salesperson, and I would tell you quite honestly that I'm an introvert. I'm happiest in my office looking at my computer. I don't love the networking thing. That's hard work for me. It's not my natural place. I'm an engineer for a reason. And so this idea of being the region manager at Pinnacle, which at that point in time was going to be two people big, it was going to be me and one field guy, was a little bit daunting. And so I asked some good friends of mine what they thought about the opportunity, and to their credit, they all told me they thought I should take the plunge. They would tell you today, if you asked them, that they thought it was a dumb idea and I shouldn't do it, but they did not say that to my face. And so I ultimately made the decision to take the job. And that was where I first met Chris and the management team that is mostly the management team here at Liberty today. It was neat in that we were a startup company. We were two people big in Canada. It was myself and a fellow named Steve Stalzer who worked out of his garage. I rented an office in downtown Calgary. And we had this opportunity to grow a business in Canada effectively from scratch, without all of the risk of being an entrepreneur, because the bills were being paid by the U.S. version of Pinnacle. So, we had a bit of a backstop, so to speak. I had a safety net, I guess it would be fair to say. And so my job was to go out and sell the mapping technology, to sell microseismic and tilt meter mapping for hydraulic fracturing work in Canada. And then, of course, we also wrote Frac Pro, the frac modeling software. And so we had software to sell. And we also did consulting services work, frac consulting work. And so I would spend my days out pounding the pavement, trying to find work for Pinnacle. And at the same point in time, build an office. We didn't have an office of our own at the time. We had no other staff. And so it was a great learning experience for me. It was really a unique chance to both find out if I could be a salesperson and all that entailed, but then grow a business, to go out and find the people, to lease an office, to buy office furniture, to get an internet connection, to figure out how to get the garbage picked up every week. All of those things that you just never think about, that maybe we take a bit for granted in the office because it all just happens. I did all of that stuff. And Pinnacle ultimately grew into I don't know how big we were, maybe 35 people in Canada by the time Halliburton bought the company in the fall of 2008. And we were a close-knit family. We had no turnover to speak of. Everybody I hired came and stayed at Pinnacle, and we had a ton of fun together. I enjoyed it a great deal. I would tell you, probably 5 months in or so, I was a little nervous I'd made the wrong decision. I hadn't sold a job of scale yet. And I remember calling Michael Stock, our CFO then at Pinnacle and still CFO here at Liberty today, and saying to him, Michael, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here, but nobody is buying. And he said, he was quite confident. He said, don't worry. And it takes 6 months, maybe a little longer, and it's going to turn out fine. And sure enough, it wasn't a month or two later that in what was in Canada at the time, now Ovintiv, bought a great big mapping project. And we were off to the races after that. It was, we never looked back. The company doubled in size every year after that for the 5 years following, and we ended up being a great organization literally on the forefront of every unconventional play that got tried in Canada. We were out there alongside the E&P company, understanding how to hydraulically fracture those wells and turn them into successful completions. So a very, very enjoyable experience with a group of people that I think still today might be the smartest group of people I've ever had the privilege of working with.
Wow, that's really good. Like this big change from mechanical engineering to working on hydraulic fracturing programs to running Pinnacle in Canada. That's really interesting. Now let's move to Liberty Energy. You are the president of Liberty Energy. You started your role in 2016. Could you please tell us more about the company, like the services, and how is it being an employee at Liberty Energy?
Sure. Let me tell you one story to kind of set that up. I share as a part of my career presentation a picture of an empty roll of toilet paper, and the caption on it says, "You don't know what you got till it's gone." And the reason I share that story is because when I was at Pinnacle, I don't know that I truly appreciated. I'm 35 years old at the time, 37 ultimately when Pinnacle got bought. I don't know that I truly appreciated how great the culture was inside of Pinnacle. We were only a 220 person company or something like that, but 220 of the most closely knit people I had ever had the privilege of working with. And Chris, to his credit, is all about creating great culture, attracting fantastic people to an organization, and creating a culture where they want to stay and make a career of it. He absolutely had done that at Pinnacle. And then Halliburton bought the organization. And of course, that comes with a bit of cultural change. Halliburton's a very different organization than little Pinnacle was. And it was a little bit of a shock to me. I only stayed at Halliburton 6 weeks after that. And it was because the cultural change was just too dramatic for me. I really, really struggled with moving from that small, nimble, everybody knew everybody's name kind of culture where we were one big team rowing in the same direction to a much, much larger organization. And so I spent the next number of years, I'll say, searching for an opportunity to repeat that, to find that same culture again. I ran into Chris Wright, our CEO, again in the fall of 2013. And he said, "I've got Liberty up and running. And, if you'd be interested in moving down to Denver, I'd love to have you on the team again." And that for me was a second chance to go back and join a team where I knew that culture would be the same. And that is truly the story of Liberty. I've been on the service company side almost my entire career, the vast majority of the 25 years. I did 2 years on the E&P side, but other than that, I've been a service company guy. And if you look at turnover in the oil field services world, particularly in the frac space, for example, your field guys, the guys at the tip of the spear doing the hard work out there every day, that number in my previous companies was 45+%. So every year we'd replace half of the field staff. It's very, very difficult to get good at what you do when half of your staff are leaving every year. And so the whole premise behind Liberty was to take an organization that is absolutely people-centric. We are a service organization. We are first and foremost about people at the tip of the spear delivering top-notch service to an E&P company. Was to take exactly that idea we'd had at Pinnacle and move it to the frac space, to create a company where people would want to come and stay and make a career of it, and especially those out in the field working on location day in and day out through the cold of the winter and the heat of the summer, 12-hour long shifts. If those guys come and they believe in something and they are here to stay, oh my gosh, can you be a differential company? And that's what Liberty was founded on the premise of, was that if we could create a unique environment where these guys in the field would want to come and make a long-term career out of it, the rest would take care of itself. My job gets very, very easy at that point in time. And so that's what Liberty's about. We have aimed to create an environment that is differential for the field guys. And it started with something as simple as a different rotational schedule. So for those of you who've been out in the field, you will know that we typically rotate 2 weeks on, 1 week off. And so if you're a family person, you got 14 days of work, you got a day of travel on either end of that, you might be home for 5 days in a month. If you're trying to raise a family, if you want to see your children at home, that's a pretty tough life to do for a long period of time. And so the very first thing we did was create a differential schedule. Our guys all rotate 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. They get half of a month at home to spend with their family. That means at Liberty, we employ 30% more people to do the same work than do our peers by virtue of having to have an additional shift of guys. But we believe that pays for itself time over and over and over and over again in improved safety performance, in improved efficiency and operational performance, in the level of service that we deliver in the field. And I think that's a testament to why Liberty is who we are today. We're only 11 years old, and we find ourselves today the second largest frac company in North America. And I give that credit entirely to the team out in the field at the tip of the spear that delivers that frac service, now wireline service, as well to our customers day in and day out. And that's a testament to the culture that Chris and our team set out to create.
Yep, that's really interesting. And as you mentioned before that you had this culture change, so I want to ask you, like, how's the relationship between you and your colleagues and also your employees? Like, how is it working under run at Liberty specifically.
Well, I hope they'd all tell you nice things about working for Ron. I love the role of president because I love the idea of thinking about the big picture. I love the idea of creating a framework within which people can go out and accomplish great things. And so, in my role as president, and certainly together with the rest of the leadership team, we're thinking about decisions in the long term. We're trying to think about what Liberty looks like in 3, 5, and 10 years. We're trying to think about what strategic acquisitions make sense to add to Liberty, given what we think our organization should look like. And so it's up to us to create that framework, to create that context within which the rest of the team is working, then to provide that clearly through good communication to the team, and then to set them free to accomplish great things. And so I hope that my team would tell you that, first of all, I'm here to listen, that my door is always open, and that I listen first and foremost, and that I'm good at that. I want to do very, very little of the talking when they are in here having a conversation with me. I hope that they would tell you that I'm supportive of them, that I encourage them all to be entrepreneurs and to fail quickly, to learn from that failure, and then to move on from that. I was given that opportunity at Pinnacle to learn all of those lessons. Some of them I learned the hard way, some of them the easy way. But those hard lessons, the ones where I stubbed my toe and fell down, but picked myself back up and got going again, those are lessons that stick with you. And so I want to foster that environment for the team that gets to work for me. And so I hope that they feel like they can go out and fail and learn from that and have the opportunity to pick up and go forward. And I hope they feel like they have the freedom to do that. It's up to me to create strong bonds between that team. Liberty is nothing but a great big family that works closely together. And we are most successful when we all have each other's backs. I want to know that everybody is working hard, not just for their own team and for their own job, but for each and every one of us. We all win if we all win together if we're all rowing in the same direction. And so it's up to me to help to create or foster that environment where those bonds between the team members across the Liberty family are strong. And that was something that was tested in COVID. Maybe the hardest year of my career, when we are a little bit disparate in where we are working, as opposed to working side by side, maintaining that culture, maintaining those strong bonds, maintaining that relationship between everybody who's here. But tough, much, much tougher in that environment. And so I was ecstatic when we're all back in the office, and, the world looks a little bit different today than it does, but gosh, I have found there is no replacement for being side by side, face to face, building those relationships with the team.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure all of them will say you are the best leader they have ever had, because all of the characteristics that you mentioned are like the true traits of a leader. And yeah, I'm pretty sure they are really enjoying working under you. Let's talk more about Liberty. So you mentioned that you are second fracking company here, service company here in the United States. So could you please tell us more about like the services of the company and what makes it like a major leader in this domain?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started first and foremost as a frac company. That was how we got our get-go back in 2011. Really, our first commercial frac job in January of 2012. We started up in the Bakken in North Dakota. We ultimately grew to be 6 frac fleets big. This is just before the 2014 downturn. So right around this time in 2014, the world went sideways on us. Liberty was 6 frac crews big. At that point in time, we were operating in the Bakken in North Dakota. We were operating in the DJ here in Colorado, and we had just entered the Powder River in Wyoming with our 6th frac crew. And then we went through what was a challenging 18 months, but presented with us with our first opportunity to take a bit of a step in scale. Sangel, a company I had worked for previously, unfortunately found themselves in bankruptcy, and we were able to buy the U.S. assets of Sangel out of that bankruptcy proceeding. That added a pathway to 9 additional frac fleets for Liberty. And so through the tail end of 16 and then all the way through 17, we built some new capacity, and we added and we put back to work all of that capacity. We found ourselves 17 or 18 frac crews big by the end of 2017. And on a pretty steady path now to be a frac company across North America. We now have a presence in the Eagle Ford and also the Permian Basin. And and growing pretty steadily. Demand for Liberty far exceeded the supply we had available to us. And so we continued to add capacity organically. And then comes the 2020 downturn, then comes COVID. The conversation had started before that. We had started actually in late 2019 having a conversation with the leadership team of Schlumberger about the acquisition of the OneStim assets in North America. So they wanted to exit the onshore North American frac business, and they had called Liberty to ask if we would be interested in doing that. They saw in Liberty a place that they thought their team would find a good home. And so we started that conversation in late 19, ultimately put it on hold for a little bit as we entered into COVID and figured out a path forward through there, but ultimately picked that conversation back up in, I guess it was maybe May or June of 2020, and saw that to fruition at the end of that year. And in January of 2021 became a bigger company yet, now with 2 sand mines, a wireline operation, and an expanded frac presence. So that acquisition added Canada, it added the Haynesville, it added the Mid-Con, it added a wireline presence in the Northeast. So now we are in every major frac basin in North America, including Canada, and providing wireline in the form of plug and perf operations in many of those basins as well. And then with a little bit of vertical integration on the sand side to support that. And so Liberty now today operates in, from the frac perspective, in all of the basins except for the Northeast. We do not frac up there yet. And we provide wireline services across that same host of basins. We are vertically integrated in that we do have 2 sand mines in the Permian. We have a mine in Kermit and a mine in Monaghan. So we have 8 million tons of nameplate sand mining capacity there. And we also have vertical integration on the pump manufacturing side of things. We have a company called ST9 underneath of Liberty. We acquired them in the fall of 18 with the goal of being vertically integrated in valve seats and fluid ends. We wanted to have control over that supply chain all the way back to the forge shop. Fluid ends, of course, are a large consumable in our world. We go through fluid ends like there is no tomorrow. And we thought we could do better at that. And we wanted a faster iterative cycle in terms of improving valve seats and fluid ends. And we thought we could do that with vertical control. And so we acquired ST9 and brought them on board. They today are a meaningful part of our supply chain for the pump side of things. They had one other very cool initiative that was, I'll call it an idea at that point in time, a well-formed idea, which was an electric frac pump. And so DigiFrac, which is our electric frac fleet offering, which will roll out commercially, well, it's happening as we speak, came through the ST9 acquisition. And then the other piece of our world that we have recently added was PropX. We believed in containerized sand as an important piece of our step forward in minimizing the impact of frac operations near residential areas, lowering the noise, dust, and truck traffic that came with pneumatic transfer of sand from one tank to another tank. And so we liked containerized sand. We jumped on that opportunity way back in 2014. And ultimately, PropX became our number one supplier, and we liked the business so much we bought it in 2021 and added it to the Liberty portfolio. So today we are a frac and wireline company. We offer last mile logistics in the form of and containerized sand. We'll call it supply of the equipment, I guess, through PropX, and then vertically integrated on the pump side of things as well. So that's Liberty Energy as it stands today.
Amazing. Big stuff going on, right?
Yes.
Yeah, let's move to the next question, and it's a little bit long, so bear with me, please. So, unconventional completion techniques have evolved a lot, especially in the past decade, and we cannot argue like how much important these technologies that are currently integrated into this business, and operators and service companies are constantly chasing ever increasing stage length in order to increase the production timing and to enhance their operation. However, there is like a compromise that need to be done between the costs and the value of these operations. So could you please elaborate more from the service company point of view, how we can more like strike the best balance between the cost and the quality of our operations in unconventional resources?
Yeah, that's a great question. We call that the road to Happy Valley. So Happy Valley being the sweet spot where we have invested. We have delivered oil or a barrel of oil or a molecule of gas out of the well at the lowest possible cost, best possible return. And so we're always seeking what the right or optimal answer is there. And of course, that answer changes with economics. The answer is very, very different when oil is $40 a barrel than when oil is $100 a barrel. We would make a very different decision about a completion and the lengths to which we were willing to go to get that incremental barrel of oil out of the well at $100 a barrel versus life at $40 a barrel. You know, you can spend an extra few dollars given what the return would look like. And so that for us is a constantly evolving equation. We have an engineering team here at Liberty, so geosciences, reservoir engineering, frac engineering, together with a data analytics team that does exactly that job day in and day out in support of our customers. Now, not everybody needs that support. You know, we have customers who do all of that engineering work internally themselves, and we might be nothing more than maybe a second check on that. And then we have customers who rely entirely on that in our world. But it's an important piece of the puzzle. And so for us, what that looks like is we maintain a database internally here at Liberty of every unconventional well drilled and completed in North America. So that's, you know, north of 100,000 wells now. But when you start to think about big data analytics, it's still not a big number. I mean, there are more credit card transactions in a fraction of a second than there are unconventional wells in North America. And so the answer to that equation is not as simple as just plugging in all the wells that have ever been drilled and the cost to drill them and the production from them and spitting out an answer. Of course, our world is much more complicated than that, and it's ever varying. So we do something that we'll call it physics constrained multivariate analysis. We have to be considerate of the economic conditions. We have to be considerate of our evolving technologies that we can bring to the table. We have to be considerate of constraints that exist out there. They might be supply chain constraints in the form of what kind of sand we can get or how much sand we can get. The water available from the customer. They might be constraints in terms of how we can complete the well. So with all of those factors brought to the table, ultimately how we can deliver the best possible return on a well for our customer. And as you've noted, that's evolved a fair bit. I mean, in the last 10 years, you don't have to go back probably even 10 years to think about a scenario where we would put 50 hydraulic fracture treatments in a horizontal well with one entry point per stage. And we were pumping ceramic proppant in there because we needed all the conductivity in the world, because there was only going to be 35 or 40 fracs to produce 1,000 barrels a day of fluid out of that well. Now, fast forward to today, and we will put 30 or 35 stages in a well, but there will be 10 or 15 individual entry points in every one of those stages. We will create 300 or 350 or 400 individual fractures. Again, the well will still produce 1,000 barrels of fluid a day, but now each of those fractures only has to carry a couple of barrels of fluid a day rather than 30 or 40 barrels of fluid a day. And so how we look at a completion is very, very different. And what our needs are in terms of conductivity out of that completion, out of that individual fracture, look very, very different than they did a little while ago. And so it's up to the engineering team here, supported by geosciences and the data team, to take that continually evolving engineering expertise that we have to understand what the needs of the completion are going to be, and then to come up with the best possible answer for that, given what our outlook is for the price of the commodity. And of course, we don't have to look too far. We get a vast majority of that oil or gas out of the well in the first 12 months now, given how steep the declines are. But nonetheless, that's how we think about that each and every day with our customers.
Yep, that's really good. We've talked about the hydraulic fracturing, the operations, the economics. So let's switch a little bit and talk about the environment. And the big debate about how is hydraulic fracturing is impacting the environment. Like lately there have been many requests from the public and the political communities in order to take a look over like the carbon footprint and reducing carbon emissions. So what do you think about like the future of Liberty Energy regarding this topic? Like, are there like some services or some operations that are going to be innovated that will for example, reduce carbon emissions on site, or maybe reduce the environmental risks of hydraulic fracturing underground or on the surface? So could you please tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah. So let me start with the big picture first of all. Liberty's mission is to better human lives. It is that straightforward. And the oil and gas industry, I would say, provides $1 worth of benefit with a dime's worth of, let's call it a nickel or dime's worth of impact. The benefits far, far outweigh the negatives that we bring to the table. Unfortunately, we don't often talk about it in that context today in the public. In the public dialogue around this, we primarily only talk about the negatives. And so I always like to start off with, look, huge positive over here, a little bit of negative over here. Do we want to do everything we can to reduce that bit of impact, to change that dime's worth of impact to a nickel's worth of impact or a penny's worth of impact? Absolutely, we do. And so we are all about that at Liberty. And you could look back through our history. That takes the form of improved chemistry. You know, we've worked hard as an industry to continue to move towards recycled water or non-potable water sources. When I started in frac, we only used fresh water. And we've moved on from that, of course. We now use highly saline water that is not consumable. And we've evolved our chemistry to allow for that. I mentioned containerized sand. We did that to try to reduce the dust, the noise, and truck traffic that came from hauling sand. Our quiet fleet, we work, within 500 feet of people's residences here in Colorado. And so do they want to be listening to a frac fleet running at full throttle in the middle of the night? No, of course they don't. And so we needed to find a way to make a frac fleet so quiet that in the middle of the night, you could hear the birds chirping and not the frac fleet running. And so we did that. And that evolution continues today. We are now moving to an industry that is becoming more and more fueled by natural gas rather than diesel fuel. And as a result, the emissions footprint per horsepower that we put in the ground is going down. And is Liberty full speed ahead on that? Absolutely. We are rolling out DigiFrac, our electric frac fleet offering. And we continue to have other initiatives that we are focused on. If you're at the Hydraulic Fracturing Conference in February, you will see a brand new pump there that we are extremely excited about. That will be a next step in this iteration, again, around the idea of minimizing the emissions footprint that comes from the hydraulic fracturing operation. So we're full speed ahead on that, and there continue to be other ways that we will work on that. Some of them are on the surface in the equipment. That's obviously the most obvious place that people can have a quick look at where our carbon footprint comes from. But to your point, some of that happens in the subsurface as well. We want to understand how best to complete a well, how to get the highest percentage recovery out of a well so that we have to drill less of them and complete less of them. And there's a huge amount of work to be done there yet today. I don't know what the next big change in recoveries out of an unconventional well is going to be, but somebody's going to crack that nut one day, and we're going to see recoveries go from, maybe something in the 12 or 13 or 14% range to maybe up into the 20s or, oh gosh, do we dare dream 30+%? That would be a game changer in our industry. And somebody will do that one day. Some smart person's going to find a surfactant or some chemistry downhole that absolutely accomplishes that. And so, for us as an industry, I believe we're incredibly innovative. I love the steps we continue to take as an industry, and Liberty's absolutely on board with that. We have recently taken steps outside of our industry to help move the ball forward in this whole conversation around carbon footprint. We're partnered with Fervo Geothermal out west of here, working on geothermal as a dispatchable renewable form of electricity. And of course, everything that we know about drilling and completing horizontal wells is absolutely applicable in that space. So we're gonna take all of that knowledge and expertise we have and help to move that forward as quickly as possible. We've recently made an investment in a battery firm in Natron that's developing sodium ion battery technology. So a little different supply chain than the lithium ion footprint. Doesn't involve an international supply chain. Doesn't involve the specialized metals that you find in lithium ion. So we think could be a meaningful game changer in the battery industry, both inside the oil industry and outside of. And so, yeah, I think we have lots of opportunity to help in that space, and we'll continue to push forward there. But we will never do so. I will say this quite honestly. We're a publicly traded company. I have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors to spend our money wisely. And so we will never invest in something that we don't believe will generate a meaningful return for the shareholders of Liberty. That is first and foremost responsibility of ours as the leadership team here. And so everything I have talked to you about, we believe has a strong financial path forward and will generate a strong return like we do in every other bit of work that we do.
Thank you. This means that we have a bright future waiting for us, right?
We do.
we are approaching the end of this podcast, and it's really exciting and interesting. I would like to ask my final question, and then I will open it for some questions from the audience. Most of the audience who are people like students who are studying petroleum engineering. So what do you think about this major, about the future of this major, and what advice can you give to all of these students to give them the motivation? Because, sometimes we are afraid about the future of the industry. There are like downturns from time to time. So what advice could you please give us, and that can motivate us? Like we consider people like you as role models for us. So any advice from you will
Sure.
So
Look, I would tell you first and foremost, and we tell everybody who works at Liberty and frankly in the broader oil and gas industry this all the time. We work in the most important industry in the world, bar none. No other industry is possible without oil and gas. The medical industry, the modern medical world, the manufacturing world, the transportation world, everything that we know in humanity predicated on the successful development in oil and gas resources, not just today, but for decades and decades and decades to come. I talked about us providing $1 worth of benefit and doing a dime's worth of damage. It is incumbent upon us to continue to drive down that impact. The world has an expectation that we continue to move to be better and better and better in that space, and we are absolutely capable of that. There are so many smart people working this industry, and many, many more smart people coming to join this industry. And so we have a future in front of us that involves figuring out how to do what we do better and better and better every day. But the most important thing that we need to keep in mind is that we can't think about the future of this industry in the context of North America and Europe alone. There are billions of people out there who do not live the life we live for lack of access to the energy that we enjoy access to today. And we have a responsibility as humanity to ensure that they find themselves lifted up to the same style of life that we do. And there is no way to do that without energy. I wouldn't say that energy is the key to getting out of poverty, but there is no way you get out of poverty without access to energy. And so we are going to, we, oil and gas, are going to be the foundation for that for years and years and years and years to come. Even the forecasts from organizations that are talking about not seeing oil and gas go away have demand for oil and gas climbing for another decade plus yet. We use 100 million barrels of liquids in round numbers today. That number is going to 110 plus million barrels a day by 2030 or beyond that. And I suspect it may plateau there. It may keep going, but it's certainly not going to go away for maybe a century yet. And so I encourage each and every one of you to come to this industry and to do so proudly, with the knowing that you will play a very, very important role in many, many people's lives for years to come. And so it's important that you hold your heads high, and beyond that you take the opportunity to have that conversation with everybody you get the chance to. Download Liberty's Bettering Human Lives report, read Michael Schellenberger, listen to Alex Epstein. There's a long list of people who talk about energy in the context it should be talked about, who provide the right talking points for having those conversations. But you have to have that that conversation with everybody, with your family at the Thanksgiving dinner table, with your hairdresser, with the person at the grocery store, with your Uber driver. It doesn't matter. We have to remind people how important energy is. To the whole title of the podcast, energy matters. It matters a great deal for humanity. And so be proud of what you do. Be excited about the career you're going into. It's going to be a long one, and there is a lot of great work to be done in this space.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you summarized it perfectly. We actually had two questions in the chat box. I think we can take them very quickly. So the first question is, how do you see the position of Liberty for the future of enhanced geothermal market?
Yeah, we love the geothermal space. Look, wind and solar have had massive investment. The challenge with them is they are intermittent, and you can look hour by hour at the inputs to the U.S. electric grid. You can go to a website and see that variability and the challenges that come with that. If you're a grid operator, that's a tough thing to manage. The wonderful thing about geothermal is it's dispatchable renewable power. And it uses exactly the same technology that we use in oil and gas. And so we see ourselves playing a role in that, taking the engineering expertise that we have, the technology that we've developed, and deploying that there to develop what is a great resource in terms of available heat in the Earth's crust. And so we'll be a big player in that, and we're quite excited about that technology going forward.
Interesting. We have our last question. So someone is asking about tackling dominant fractures observed during the frac job. Could you please throw some light on how often this happens, and how do you work with operators to minimize fracture runaway in subsequent frac jobs in the next set of wells?
Yeah, look, we don't always know when that happens, of course. Only some portion of hydraulic fracture treatments actually get monitored, where we get a good understanding of what's happening underground. But we absolutely can address that. Perforation design is probably the most critical piece to that, in ensuring that we have ensuring that we have good distribution over the entire stage, that we have proper fluid distribution across each of the perf intervals that we put in place, that we ultimately end up developing the fracture that we expected to develop, a series of them with fluid relatively evenly distributed inside the constraints that we expected the frac to live in from a height standpoint, and with the length and exposure from a square footage standpoint that we expected to develop. So we focus an awful lot on perf strategy today. It was certainly one of the most appealing things that came from the OneStim transaction, was the ability to work more closely in that wireline space, to work with the charge manufacturers, to work in the perforating strategy design, and now we're front and center on that. But that's a critical piece of the dance back and forth with frac in terms of how we think about wellbore completion and optimizing the frac development underground.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, I think we came to an end for our podcast today. On behalf of TAMU-SPE, Society of Petroleum Engineers at Texas A&M, we really appreciate the time that you gave for us, and all the advice that you gave to students. It was very insightful, and I'm pretty sure everyone enjoyed this talk. Just like one final word that you would like to say to our students, or of course we have other students joining us from different universities as well, so just like a final word before we end this.
Look, pleasure to be with you today. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share a little bit of my story with you. If you ever have any questions, if you want to talk, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. I will do my best to get back in touch with you. I enjoy these conversations immensely. I love the opportunity that oil and gas has provided for me, the opportunity to see the world, the friends that I have built in this world. I can only wish the same for each and every one of you as you find your way out into the work world. And so I wish you all the best in that.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you everyone for joining us. It was really a nice talk today, and hopefully you will have a great rest of your day, and see you at our next podcast.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.